started. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Jenna Villani. I am the Executive Director of Alumni Relations here at William Patterson University. And I thank you for joining us for this session in our career workshop series, Jumpstart Your 2021 Job Search. Tonight's session is called Turn Interviews into Offers. And whether you're in a current job search, considering a career transition, or looking to take your career to the next level, our goal with this series is to help support you in your career search. So please join us virtually for the final session in our series, which will take place on Tuesday, June 22nd, and will focus on effective salary and job negotiation. And just so everyone's aware, all of our previous sessions have been recorded and are available on our alumni YouTube channel. I'd like to take a moment to just acknowledge my colleague, Kate Matthews, who's with us tonight as well. Kate is the Associate Director of Alumni Relations. And while we're not able to come together in person at this time, we're pleased to provide many ways for you to stay connected to William Patterson and your alumni community in online and virtual formats. So I encourage you to take advantage of the many virtual programs and activities that we're offering, such as the virtual book clubs, social events, lifelong learning opportunities, career development programs, and more. If you're looking for additional career resources, I encourage you to sign on to Handshake, where you can browse job postings, attend virtual webinars, access career workshops, and more. And for recent graduates, members of our most recent graduating class have access to the full resources of the Career Development Center for up to 1 year after graduation. And lastly, I encourage you to join the official WP Alumni LinkedIn group to make connections and network with fellow alumni. So before we get started, I just want to share some details about how tonight will work. So when you entered, your microphones were muted, and we kindly ask that you please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. There may be times where we'll ask you to unmute, but during the presentation, if you can keep your microphones muted, we'd appreciate it. And you're welcome to put your video on or keep it off, whatever you're most comfortable with. We do want this to be interactive, and we welcome questions. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat box throughout the webinar, and we'll take some time to answer those questions at the end of the session. And lastly, I just want to share that today's session is being recorded, and it will be available on demand on our alumni YouTube channel after the session. So this session is going to cover an interview strategy that will ensure that you stand out from competition, how to prepare for an interview, including addressing objections to or issues with your candidacy and developing your 2 to 3 success stories, tactics to employ during the interview, and following up, how to turn a no into a yes or an apparent rejection into an opportunity. Before I introduce Rob and turn it over to him, I would like to welcome and introduce my colleague, Mary Alice Barrows, who is the Interim Director of the Career Development Center. And I will turn it over to Mary Alice to say a few words.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. What I would love to share with you on behalf of the Career Development Center and our team is, as Jenna mentioned, we do still serve our alumni. I know typically we only will have our alumni meet with a career center professional 1 year, 18 months after graduation, but all of our services, resources, events, programming, and our Handshake job and internship career management portal is open to alumni for a lifetime. So we encourage you, if you're going through a job transition or continuing your job search, please reach out to us with any questions. We're here to help and support on your career journey, continued career journey. Handshake, as I mentioned, is our job and internship job board or portal, but it's much more than just a job board. You can connect with the Career Center staff, upload your resume for individualized critiques. You can view all of our virtual events, programming, recruiting, attend any of our career fairs and programs. So please stay connected with us, and we're here to help you, throughout your transitions from careers as you continue on your career development journey.
Thank you, Mary Alice.
You're welcome.
So now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for the night, Rob Hellman. Rob is the president of Helming Career Consulting, and he's helped over 1,000 individuals to achieve career success and dozens of organizations to improve effectiveness via executive coaching and workshops. Rob is a Get 5 certified senior career and executive coach and a LinkedIn certified professional recruiter, and he's been in private practice since 2003. As a career coach and executive coach, Rob helps clients almost every day to define and achieve their career and job search goals, develop as managers and leaders, and navigate through challenging work situations. Rob is a sought after speaker and has delivered hundreds of seminars, workshops, and keynotes to corporations, higher education institutions, professional associations, government agencies, and nonprofits. Rob is a regular contributor to Forbes. His insights have also appeared in media outlets, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, CBS News, CNN Money, ABC News, NBC News, Consumer Reports, Glassdoor.com, and many others. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Rob.
Thanks for that nice introduction, Jenna. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So before we dive into the content, let me just mention a couple of things. First off, I will be talking a lot. There'll be a little bit of some opportunities for being a little bit of interactive in the presentation, where I might ask for your feedback. But for the most part, I'll be taking questions at the end. So just keep that in mind, starting to probably around 7, maybe a little bit after. Second thing I want to mention is, feel free to take notes and all that, and this is being recorded, but if you want the slides right away, you can get the slides by going to, hold on, there we go, going to this link, bit.ly/WP52521. You don't even need www in front of it, just type this right into your browser and you will get the slides. So I just wanted to mention that. All right, and last thing I just want to say is, feel free to type in your questions at any time. Use the chat feature, type in your questions. Just keep in mind that I might answer them later on in the presentation, but we'll get to them. If I haven't answered them already, I will get to them definitely at the end of the session. All right, that said, let's dive into the content. So I want to talk about acing the interview in 4 parts, right? Oops. Well, you know what? Before that, I mentioned asking you, getting questions from you, right? So let me start by asking you a question. I almost forgot about this. Let's do a poll. Jenna, can we launch that poll?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you. So the poll is basically asking you to enter true or false. The hiring decision is made within the first minute of the interview. What do you think? Give me your responses. Let's take 30 seconds. All right, I think we've got a couple more. Okay. All right, I think I'm gonna click end polling, and let's see what we got here. So can we show the results? I'll share them. I can do this. Here are the results. So the majority of you, 2/3 of you said true, 1/3 of you said false. So it looks like the trues have it in the poll, but in fact, the falses are correct. Sorry, trues, but the falses are correct. And the reason the falses are correct is because unless you're way, way off, like you come in like a total mess, like just everything you're saying is just ridiculous, you have an opportunity to turn a no into a yes, even after the interview is over. I've seen it happen many times. I've helped clients do this. So very often the first impression that is not what they end up going with. It depends on how effectively you can influence their decision-making later on in the interview and even after the interview. So we're going to clearly be talking about this a lot, especially for those of you who said you thought this was true. You'll get some more insight here about how the first impression necessarily isn't the deciding factor, okay? Again, unless you're way off, right? So just keep that in mind as we go through this webinar, and I want to talk about the content in this webinar in 4 parts, like how to ace the interview in 4 parts. The first part we'll discuss is the interview strategy. Once you understand the strategy, then we'll dive into how to prepare, what do you do at the interview, the tactics, and how do you follow up where you can actually influence the outcome and even turn a no into a yes. And you'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm not saying the goal is to get the offer. I'm saying the goal is to get the next meeting. I'm saying that for a specific reason. Because if you think, oh, the goal is to get the offer, it's going to put a lot of pressure on you. You're going to get more nervous. You might close too soon. You might start doing things like negotiating salary before you really should be doing that, right? It's not about that. If you could just think about it like in terms of, like, I just want to do well enough in this meeting so I can get another meeting with them, then you're doing the right thing and you'll ultimately get the offer. Okay, if you could just keep getting the meetings until they finally offer you the job, that's the attitude you should have. Okay, now, so keeping that in mind, let's talk about this first part, the strategy. And the fact is that, a lot of job seekers, they don't think about a strategy, just think of like, I have to just super, be like really impress the interviewer, right? Like I'm the good little interviewee. I have to memorize the answers to every possible question they can ask me. Maybe I'll go, order from Amazon, like some book, like 1,000 answers to 1,000 interview questions and memorize all those answers. I made that title up. I don't know if that exists, but similar titles definitely do. You'll think, oh, I got to prepare some questions to show how smart I am. Or maybe you'll start, like in the interview, you'll start talking about things that have nothing to do with how you can help them. And you're thinking you're doing great because you're not even getting onto that. You don't want to do any of this, right? This is like what typically happens. You don't want to take this strategy, okay? This is not what you want to do. Instead, what you want to do is something very different. You want to adopt a consultative sales strategy. And this is key. Like in a job search, you are not a business analyst or a project manager or a chief financial officer or whatever, all those things that you might actually be looking for a job in. What you are is the best salesperson in the world and the best marketer in the world for yourself. That's the mindset you want to bring to every aspect of your job in a job search. And if you've heard me present in the other webinars here for William Patterson over the last few months, you've heard me say this before. It's so true of the interview process. Interview is all about selling. It's not like used car sales, it's consultative sales. You want to adopt a consultative sales strategy. You want to think and act like a consultant. So if any of you have ever done consulting, this will resonate with you. You want to keep the conversation, the dialogue, focused on their issues, their problems, their challenges. And the fact is, I underline the word dialogue because you want to make it a dialogue. You want to make it a conversation. You say something, they ask you something, you answer it, then you ask them something, they answer it, then they ask you something. You want to make it that conversation so you're focusing on their client's problems. When I say focus, I mean learn how you can help them, and then through your questions and hearing what they're saying, and then show them how you can help them using examples to make it come alive. We're going to talk a lot more about the examples later. So that's what I mean by keeping your focus and attention on the client's problems, right? And one of the ways you do this is before you even go into the interview, do some research to have like a hypothesis about how you might be able to help them. This is what a consultant does. Before they have a meeting with the prospect, they think, well, they probably need help with X. Now, then they go into the meeting with the prospect and they ask questions to see if they're right, if this prospect actually does need help with X. And sometimes they find out, no, they really need help with Y. Now they learn something, but at least they're asking the right questions. So you want to have that hypothesis so you'll ask the right questions, the smart questions. And when I say smart question, I mean question that'll help you understand how you can help them. So that way you can show them how you can help them, right? So ultimately, you want to get to, once you understand how you can help them, sharing examples either from the past or for what you would do on the job to make your experience come alive, right? And the last thing a consultant does is like they would follow up with a proposal, right? You need to follow the same outline in an interview for a non-consultant, for a job, like a W-2 job, right? Where you're working full time. When I say proposal here, sometimes it is even a proposal if you're going in for a regular job. but you think of this very loosely, really in terms of writing what I call an influence email, a high impact follow-up email. We're going to talk a lot more about this afterwards. So that's the idea here, the strategy. And to execute this strategy, you need to have the right mindset. You want to like pretend you already have the job, like you're just on the same side of the table as them, trying to help them solve their problems. And by the way, if you're doing this, first of all, you'll be less nervous. And secondly, you'll be naturally focusing on their number one question, which is, how can you help me? In fact, any interviewer only has 3 questions that they're asking. Their number one question is, how can you help me, right? Number 2, why do you want to work here? Meaning, are you going to stick around or are you going to leave in 6 months? And lastly, will you fit in? Will we get along with you? Will we enjoy working with you? All that. So when you're preparing, you want to think about these 3 questions. Everything you think they're asking is really going to fall into one of these 3 buckets. And the most important is, how can you help me? Because if you can't help them, they don't care about why you want to work there and will you fit in. That's the number 1. Okay, so that's the strategy. Now let's dive into preparation. Okay, the way I would think about preparation, keeping the strategy in mind, is you want to have like a checklist. And these are the things you want in your checklist. First off, you want to address issues they might have with your candidacy. You want to do that proactively, like things you're afraid they're going to bring up, stuff like that, right? Then you want to have a list of questions you want to ask. And this is not to show how smart you are. Again, this is to learn how you can help them so you can show them how you can help them. That's the point of the questions. You want to have your interview pitch. We talked about this pitch in one of the prior webinars, might have been the last one. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you need to prepare a good 2-minute interview pitch. You want to have 2 to 3 success stories. We're going to talk about that. And then you want an answer to why you want to work there. Okay. So I just want to talk about the last one for a second, why you want to work there first. You want to be specific. You don't want to just say like, your company is great. And you want to, because specific sounds authentic. It means genuine. It means believable. You don't want to say, oh, because I need a job. You want to say something about why their company in particular, or their department, or maybe you've heard something about the great organizational culture, and say what that is. But try to be specific, okay? Not generic when you talk about why you want to work there, and look for a reason to tell them, because they want to know that you're going to stick around, that you're into it, that you're going to go the extra mile, okay? Now let's go up to the first one, okay? Handling issues they might have, right? The idea here is you want to you got 2 options. Either proactively address the issue, meaning address the issue in your pitch and your answer to their questions before they even bring up the issue, so they will never bring it up. Or if they bring up the issue, answer it briefly, as positively as possible, and then change the subject back to how you can help them, why you want to work there, ask them a question. So I'll tell you what, why don't you all use the chat feature? I want to look at somebody list for me, type in the chat feature, an issue that you're afraid they're going to bring up in an interview, something that makes you uncomfortable when they bring it up. And I want to talk about how you might address it. I mean, there's some obvious ones that I get all the time, but I want to hear directly from you. So go ahead, type in what some of your issues that you're afraid they're going to bring up, or you hate when they bring it up, you don't know how to answer it, and let's see if I can help you. Use the chat feature to do that. And I'll go look at it. Okay, so I got already somebody, okay, a couple, this is great. All right, perfect, thank you. I'm gonna address a couple of these, right? And you're gonna see it's very similar. So one person wrote like short length of stay in prior jobs. So that's an issue, right? You jumped around, it looks like you've jumped around, okay? So what you need to do, at the very least, you have to have a good answer. You have to have a good story around that. Short length of stay. You got to keep it super positive. You don't want to say, oh, if they say, well, why'd you leave in your prior job? You're only there for a year. What happened? I hated my boss, and my boss hated me. So it was time to go. You don't want to do that, because they might even have sympathy for you, but they'll never hire you, right? So this is a really important point. You want to keep things as positive as possible. Okay, so, and this is one case where maybe you can't be literally honest. Like everywhere else, you want to be as honest as possible. But if you left because your boss hated you, you cannot tell them my boss hated me as much as you want to be truthful, because they'll appreciate your honesty and they will never ever hire you. So you're going to have to, and they want you to sort of fudge this. They want you to be business savvy, to play the game, because they want you to do that on the job too. They want you to know that you're smart. They want to know that you're smart enough to not be literally giving the exact correct answer for everything, but thinking about the business goals. So what you got to come up with something. So keep it positive. You can even, but the point here is to say something quick. Don't spend a lot of time on it. I know when I get nervous, I talk too much. Do the opposite. Talk less, not more. If you're nervous, say, oh, there, you know what? I was there a year. It was great. I helped them, but I really realized when I was in this job that I was really interested in something quite different. This job really helped me with that realization. And that's why I'm talking to you. That's why I decided to leave and I'm talking to you, right? Or you could say, like, I got there, but you know what? They had a major reorg. Like a lot of people were let go. I was one of them. First in, first out, that kind of thing. But that was it. But you know what? It was fine because it really gave me the time to look for what I really want, which is a bit different from that job. And this is what I really want, right? So like the exact right answer I'd have to talk to you about. But I think you get the idea. And so you say something brief, and then what you say, and this is what I really want. And I'm really glad to be talking to you because, and then you tell them why you want to work there, because I've heard so many great things about the culture, and the types of problems you're trying to solve in this department are exactly the kind of things I'm interested in particular, how to bring these new products to market in a competitive environment. I want to ask you more about this type of product. Then ask them a question, like change the subject. Get off of this subject that you don't want to talk about. That's how you do it, right? So same thing like overqualified, or over-experienced. Like what you have to do for anything like that, overqualified, over-experienced, like you that's a case where you can preempt them saying that or thinking that by showing enthusiasm, right? You want to show you're really into the job, that you're really into them, that you can't wait to work for them, that you can't wait to help them. Because overqualified sometimes means like, oh, maybe they're going to want my job. You don't want to convey that, right? So you want to say, how can your questions even, you can do it that way through your questions. How can I be of help to you? How can I best support you? How can I best help you? Focus on them, on the person in front of you that you would work for. And they're not going to be so worried about you being overqualified, and show that you're really into this work. Okay? And some of these, by the way, you can do in your resume. Make sure your resume is targeted so it doesn't look like you're overqualified, right? Lack of experience is the same thing. It's the same idea, because you got to talk about your experience in a way, like build it up. Use words that make it sound like, pick, if they say, do you have, here, I'll give you an example. If they say, do you have experience in X? You could say no, right? Which is maybe the truthful answer. But that's sort of a downer, right? Or you could say, well, I have experience in Y, which is just like X, which is the better way, right? The second way. So try to reframe things in a positive way, okay? Anyway, I think you're getting the idea, right? You want to talk less, not more, if it's a problem that you don't have a good answer for and you don't feel comfortable with. Keep it positive, answer it briefly, prepare in advance, and then pivot to them. Talk about why you want to work there, and then ask them a question about how you can help, so they're talking about something else. That's the idea, right? And if you have more questions about this, we can do this in the Q&A at the end. Now let's talk about the questions you want to ask, right? The questions you want to ask are anything that will help you to understand how you can help them, right? So the way you need to figure out those questions is, beforehand, like learn who you're going to meet with. Like before you even have the interview, maybe an admin set this up, right? And if the admin set it up, you might reach out to the admin and say, I know we have an interview next Tuesday. I'm curious, just so I can prepare, if you could tell me a little bit about who I'm going to meet with, like what they do, their names, so I can prepare better. And so you want to do that. You can look them up on LinkedIn. You can Google them and try to figure out what their challenges are, what their issues are, what they might be interested in. And then, ask them questions like, to see if you're right. So that's the idea. So research is very important. A lot, and the research is like, Ask the person to set up the meeting, look at their LinkedIn profiles, a company website, Google them, trade journals, blogs, other websites. You get the idea, right? If you need to do other research like LinkedIn company page, Twitter, whatever, other social media, go to, if you go to I don't know if you can see this, my website, I have a bunch of resources on my website. If you go to the resources tab, that can help you uh, research companies and organizations, might help you figure out what their challenges are, what their issues are. Okay, so that's very important. Now, what kind of questions do you want to ask? Well, remember, you're not asking questions to impress them. I don't want you to think that way. I don't want you to think I got to impress them with my questions. I want you to think I got to figure out how I can help them. Otherwise, I can't show them how I can help them. So your mission, in fact, I challenge you to be like Sherlock Holmes. I had this up before, right? The slide before, right? There's Sherlock Holmes here. I want you to be like on a mission, like an investigator, to learn how you can help them, what they need, what their challenges are, what their issues are. That way you can sell them. You can't sell them. You can't close the deal. You can't get them to hire you if you don't understand how you can help them. So that is your challenge. So those are the questions you want to ask. I mean, at the most basic level, I mean, you want to ask things like, anything that'll help you understand what their issues are. Like, what do you need my help with right away? How can I help you day one? How about 6 months down the road or in a year down the road? Is that going to change? What types of people succeed in this role? What types of people don't succeed in this role? How will my success be measured? How will we know I'm successful, say, a year after you hire me? So then you'll learn what's important to them in terms of success. And you can say, oh, I'll be able to do that. And you can give them an example. Who will I be interacting with? Oh, you're going to be working a lot with IT and marketing. Oh, I've worked with those areas before. If you want, I can give you an example. Or, so you can learn how you can help them, what they need you to do. Okay. What does a typical day look like? You might ask that if you're still not clear about how you can help them. Now, these are just sort of high-level, superficial questions that sort of apply to any job. You can ask a whole other layer of questions based on your research that really depends on the job, based on what you're finding out when you look at their annual reports or you're looking at their LinkedIn profile or their website. There's a whole other layer of questions that you need to ask based on your research. So these are just some ideas about the types of questions. Now, the next thing, so that's another thing. If you have questions on these questions, feel free to ask in a little while, right? You can type them in the chat feature, but I'll get to them later. Now, the next thing, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it because I spent so much time on it. I think it was the prior webinar or the one before that, which is your pitch. It might have been 2 webinars ago, right? So all I want to say is you need to have a good interview pitch. You want it to be conversational. This is stuff I already talked about. You want it to be like you memorized a script, and you want to use this pitch to answer any open-ended question you get in an interview. So let me just say, most of the questions you get in an interview, you don't need to memorize the answers. You need to memorize the stories you want to use to illustrate the answers. I'm going to explain that in a lot more detail in a few minutes. But just keep that in mind for now. But there are some exceptions. There are some places where you want to have literally memorized the answers. One case is these open-ended questions where they say, tell me about yourself, tell me about your experience, tell me about your background, even take me through your resume. And you want to have a good answer to those open-ended questions. There's so many ways to answer them. Like, do they want to hear, like, I was born in a log cabin? And like, they don't care about that, right? They want to know, how can you help me? Why do you want to work here? And will you fit in? So in this case, craft a pitch that's really powerful, really engaging, and then rehearse it, practice it so it's very comfortable, so it sounds like conversational, not like you memorized it, and you'll really elevate the conversation if you can deliver this, okay? And I'm not going to go through it all now, but you can review this in these slides if you want, or listen to the recording from the prior webinar, which talks all about the pitch. I'd probably advise that you do that. But it's these elements. We've talked about this before. Like, you start with your hook, then how to categorize you, what differentiates you, and on and on. Have that value proposition. I'm highlighting this again only because you need to have this pitch, even if they never ask you an open-ended question. I want you to think to yourself, what is my key differentiator? What is my brand? What really differentiates me? What really makes me stand out? What's the essence of the value I have? Like these examples here. And look to share that in the interview somehow. Even if they don't ask you an open-ended question, try to bring it in somehow. Because it's important for them to hear this. It's important for you to find a way, a place to tell them why you versus the competition. So creating your pitch will help you figure that out, even if you never get to give your entire 2-minute pitch in its entirety. Okay? So that's what I want to say about that. We don't need to talk about this because this is all from the last webinar. And just for people who came late, I just want to put this up again. If you want the slides, you can go to this link, bit.ly/WP52521. You don't even need to type www beforehand. You can just type bit.ly, this thing in your browser, and you'll get the slides. So just wanted to mention that. And let's keep going. So that's the pitch, okay? So you need to answer any of those open-ended questions. Just dive right into your pitch and make it interesting. So, okay, let's talk about something else that is super important, your stories, your success stories. In fact, if I could point to just one thing that could, if you do it really well, can improve your odds the most of getting an offer, it's telling a good story. It's giving a great example, because our brains are wired to remember the imagery in these stories, in these examples, you know? So basically you wanna make your experience come alive. And there are two ways to do that. One is by giving examples, like always looking to share examples of these fantastic stories you've prepared in advance that you know are gonna resonate. The other way you could do it is to tell them what you would do. Well, look, if I came on the job in the first 3 months, here's how I would approach it, right? And illustrate for them. Or I think, you know what? One thing I could really help you with is X, and then talk about what you would do. Now, that's also really good because you're making the experience come alive that way. But it's riskier because you might say the wrong thing. Maybe they don't need that. Maybe they've already tried that. Maybe they think, you know what, this thing you're proposing would never work in our organization for political reasons that you don't understand. So I'm not saying not to do that, but you got to be very cautious when you think about sharing illustrating what you would do on the job. So maybe do that, but the stories are always a safe bet. You want to prepare these in advance. And what I would do is come up with 2 or 3 relevant success stories. You don't need 15 different stories. In fact, I don't even want you to have 15 different stories, because if you do, that means it's going to be too much memorization. You're not going to be able to have time to practice any individual story enough to make it sound great. And you don't need more than 3. 3 is enough so that you don't sound like a one-trick pony, that you have a little bit of variety. It's enough, right? Practice them, introduce them in your pitch. So when you're delivering your pitch, we talked about this again in the prior webinar, when you get into the step 4 of the pitch, where you say, let me give you a couple of examples, you introduce the stories in your pitch. You know, when I was at this company, I did X, which resulted in Y. I also did A, which resulted in B, and C, which resulted in D. So you want them to ask you, tell me more about X, which resulted in Y. Then you give them the whole story, okay? And try to bring these stories in to answer every question. So basically what you're going to do, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Every question you get, your first thought should not be, what's the right answer? That should not be your first thought. Your first thought should be, I promised Rob I would tell one of these success stories in this interview. I'd get at least one of these stories heard. They're fantastic. I practiced them. They're great. So can I use this question as an opportunity to bring in one of my success stories to illustrate how I can help them? That's how your brain should work. You want to reprogram your brain to think that way, to answer every question, okay? I'm going to give you a chance to practice this, a couple of you a chance to practice this, but I want you to understand the structure first, and then you'll get to practice it, okay? So the way you want to organize these stories to make them as compelling as possible, there are many ways to organize a good story. I like this way because it's super simple and it works, and it gives you all the elements you need to tell a really interesting story. The problem you faced, or the situation, the challenge you faced, the action you took, and then the result. PAR, problem, action, result. Because any great story has these elements in it. And you want to make these stories, these examples, dramatic, make them engaging, make them important, Like just think about any great book you read or any great movie you saw. There's always like a problem that the hero faced or a challenge or the obstacle the hero had to overcome. Then the action the hero took, like they went on their journey and you followed them on their journey. That's like most of the movie or the book. And then the result, they lived happily ever after. You want to do the same thing and add the same kind of drama, the same kind of importance, even emotion to these stories, because that's how you wake people up who are interviewing so many people. They're so busy. They're thinking about all these other things. I want them to pay attention to you. And this is how you get them to pay attention to you, is by making your stories interesting, and you make you yourself memorable, and you make your experience memorable. Okay, so a common mistakes that people make when they're telling their success stories is there's too much detail. Like they become boring. In fact, I would think about like roughly 2 minutes for these stories. If it's a lot longer than that, you're probably including too much detail and they're going to get bored, right? Another thing is too much jargon. Like maybe you're throwing in a whole bunch of acronyms. You just assume they know stuff. In fact, there's even a name for this, the curse of knowledge. You can Google it. There's pages and pages on this where the person who's presenting, and this is like a little presentation when you're telling a story, presenting just assumes too much knowledge on the part of the listener or the audience, the interviewer. So be careful. Too little detail. Maybe it's too short. Maybe only talking for a minute. It's too high level. It's not interesting enough. It's not memorable. This is a really common problem. When people tell me their examples, their stories, when I listen to them, I hear, well, first we did this, then we did that, then we did this other thing. Too much we. They need to know what you did. So when you're practicing these stories, you want to say, well, I did this, not we. I mean, you can use we a little bit, or maybe even better, you can say, I partnered with, or I worked with this team to show what role you had. But I want them to understand the contribution you made. Because we means like, well, maybe everybody else did all the work and you did nothing, right? So you got to make sure you put I in there. They understand where you came in, okay? You want to make sure we talk problem, action, result, right? PAR, problem, action, result. The problem and the result make them a big deal. Tie them to the bottom line, okay? There's too little action in the problem, action, result. You just jump over it. Okay, you go right to, let me give you an example. So I had a client who, she was like an account manager. And so somebody asked her a question like, what's your greatest strength? And she said, my greatest strength, she could have just said, oh, my greatest strength is whatever, something. And that would have been fine, right? But instead, she remembered what I told her. She said, I got to bring in a story. And she answered, she said, my greatest strength is X. Let me give you an example. And then she told the story. But initially, her story was kind of lame. It wasn't that interesting. Her initial example was something like, oh, well, let me give you an example. So I was an account manager, and I heard my client, who was, an important account, was going to leave. So I was able to create a presentation and convince them to stay. And my department, my company was very happy I was able to do that. Like that was essentially the initial story, right? It's just like, okay, not bad, not terrible. It's interesting to some degree, but not that interesting. They probably even want to ask more about it, You want to tell a much better story than that. Like at the end of the story, so basically after we worked on it together, she had something much more compelling. So here's what she said. She said something like, yes, I was let me give you an example. So I was an account manager in my current job, and one of our key accounts, who accounted for about a third of our entire revenue at the company, I found out through my connections and my network that they were thinking of going to a competitor, which would have devastated us, especially because we were trying to find an investor and possibly to be bought, and this would have ruined the chances if this client had left. So there was so much on the line here affecting the whole company's future around keeping this client. And at the time, my client didn't even know that I knew they were thinking of leaving. I just heard because I had such a great network. So that was the problem. Now you can see how much more dramatic and interesting the problem is, right? It's tied to the bottom line, and the interviewer is paying attention. So that's what I mean by making it much more dramatic, important. I want them to understand that what you were doing is really important to the company. It was a big deal. Like I wanted to learn that the things that you did mattered, because it shows that you had a lot of responsibility, that people trusted you with things. So they can trust you with things too if they hire you. Okay. Now, so then she went into the action. She said, okay, so anyways, that was the problem. And so I had to find a way to keep this client. There was so much on the line. So what I figured out is the way that I needed to address this. I had to think about three things. First, I had to figure out what was the issue. Like, why would they want to leave for a competitor? Secondly, I had to buy some time so we can come up with a response. And thirdly, I had to convince them through our response. So that three-pronged approach, now you see what she did. She introduced the action. I want you to do the same thing. I want you to show them how you think by showing like your strategy, how you approach solving the problem. And she did that little introduction. Also, it helps them follow the rest of the story if you introduce the action that way. She said like I approached this from three angles, right? Or maybe it's two or one or whatever. In this case, it was three, whatever it is, okay? And so then she went into each of those three things. So she said, all right, so for the first thing, to figure out what the issue was, I leveraged my network. I found out that our competitor was offering something that we didn't have. We really didn't have an answer to it, and we wouldn't. So that's why they were going to go over there. And so that was I figured out what the problem was. Now, because I had such great relationships with a lot of the C-level executives there, I was able to get meetings with them and say, listen, you've been a long-term client with us. We've done right by you. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, yes. Give us a chance to come up with a response. I think we can give you a compelling reason to stay with us. Right? So now she's going to the second thing. And then the third thing, then she said, well, I got my team together. We came up with a response that wasn't about so much what we could do that was just as good as our competitor, but what we could do that was even better, that was different and better. And I came up with this presentation with my team. We went as a team we got a meeting with the C-level executive who was the decision maker and their team. We presented this. It turned into another meeting and another meeting. And after 3 meetings and a lot of conversations, they ended up changing their mind and staying with us. And not only did they stay with us, but they gave us even more business. So it was a great success and ultimately enabled the company to find a buyer, which is really why I'm talking to you. So you could see how she made the problem, the action, and the result so much more interesting, so much more dramatic, how the result was even much more important, much more of a big deal. They gave us even more business than what was in the initial story. That's what you need to do for your examples, for your stories. I want you to tell a compelling story that way. Write it out, rehearse it, make it roughly 2 minutes, give or take, make it sound great. Practice it on everybody. Practice it on your spouse or your friends or your dog or whoever. Get their opinion. They should be able to understand it even if they're not in your business, because I don't want it to be too heavy on jargon and all that, okay? So now let's talk about what you do at an interview, the tactics. How do you handle their questions in particular? You really want to think about this like it's a game. Like, it's not like, oh, they ask you a question, you think, oh, they asked me what's my greatest strength. I didn't memorize the answer to that question. What am I going to do? I don't know. You don't need to think that way. What you need to do is think, okay, they asked me this question. It's not about what is the answer. It's like I got to play it like a game. In fact, what I'm going to do is reprogram my brain. So the first thing I think about, I started to talk about this before, the first thing I think about is not what is the right answer, but can I use this question to show them how I can help them using one of my success stories that I prepared in advance. Okay, so that example, like what's your greatest strength, right? You don't have to memorize the answer. Anything that can help you to tell the story is a good answer. they're not going to remember the literal answer to the question, just as one of many questions, like what is my greatest strength? Yeah. Or tell me about your experience. If they say that, tell me about your experience, or tell me what you've been doing. You want to just tell them off, I've been doing this and this. You want to say, I've been doing this and this, and then give them an example. Let me give you an example, because they're going to remember the examples, the stories. That's what's going to stick in their minds. It's going to make your experience come alive. So you always want to get to the story. It doesn't matter so much what the literal answer is to the question. What matters is that you can use the answer to get to the story. Okay? So with my client before, when we were talking about that story about the key account manager, and they asked what's the greatest strength, she could have said anything. Well, my greatest strength is being able to come up with solutions very quickly, or building great relationships, or leading a team to in a very productive way, because she led her team to come up with this solution, right? There are lots of things she could have said. It doesn't really matter. They wouldn't even remember it. What matters is that great story she told. So that's how you want to think. The first thing you want to think is, can I use this question to show them how I can help them using one of these success stories? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes there is no way to bring in a story. Like some of the things you all were bringing up before, like things you're afraid they're going to bring up, like, why did you leave your job after a year? Or do you have experience in X and you don't, right? Well, maybe in that case, you can't bring in a story, but what do you do then? If you can't bring in a story, then you want to be brief. This is where you play it like a game, right? Either sidestep the question or be brief and steer it back to answer briefly and steer it back to the game of getting and giving information about how you can help. Like use it as an opportunity to tell them why you want to work there, and then ask them a question. Like, remember those questions I was asking you to share with me before about things you're uncomfortable that they bring up, and how I was showing you how to address them? That's what we did. We did that. That was like the third and last option right here, right? Like, oh, why'd you leave your job or whatever? Answer it briefly, then change the subject back to them. Say you're glad to be talking to them, tell them why you want to work there, and then ask them a question. That's the idea here. That's your strategy. Let's get really specific. So I had a client who said to me once, Rob, I had this interview question. How would you find a needle in a haystack? I had no idea how to answer it. And they said, what would you say? I had no idea. What do you do? How do you handle that question? So I want to hear from you. Go into the chat and tell me, how do you think you would answer a question like that? How would you find a needle in a haystack? Give me your thoughts. Give me your strategy in the chat feature about how you would approach handling that question or the answer. Okay, I'm getting some good responses here with the powerful magnet, kind of similar, right? Carefully and thoroughly with a magnet. I'm getting the magnet theme. Okay. Remember, if you are following my guidance here, hold on. Sorry. Which is to reprogram your brain so that your first thought is, how can I use this question to show how I can help them using one of my success stories? Your first thought should not be, oh, a magnet or whatever. Your first thought should be, is there any way I can answer this question and at the same time bring in one of the stories? Because that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to care about the story. They're not going to care about the literal answer to the question. Okay. So what you want to do is, in this case, I told my client, I said, I would say, if it were me, I would say something like, your question about how to find a needle in a haystack reminds me of the situation at work where something went wrong and we couldn't figure out what it was. And it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So here's what we did. And then you tell the story about what you did. You're starting to introduce a story. So that's one way of doing it. It's a better way. You're answering the question and you can bring the story in, right? It's very similar, like these crazy questions. Like if you were a car, what kind of car would you be? Who cares what the answer is? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're showing them how you can help them using one of your examples, right? So I don't even have an answer. I mean, you can say anything. You say, I'd be a car that gets you there quickly and never breaks down. You know, and then that always knows the route automatically or something. Let me give you an example, and then tell your story. You know, anything that can help you to tell the story you already have memorized, right? That's all, right? Tell me about yourself. It's the pitch. Why should we hire you? All that, right? Your greatest strength we already talked about. Bring in one of your stories. Now, there's another set of questions where you have to memorize the answer. Okay, like what's your greatest weakness? Give me an example of assignment you weren't proud of, or where you didn't get the outcome you wanted, or maybe you got a criticism for your boss. Tell me about the criticism you received from your boss. Any of those questions, they're designed to get you to share something negative about yourself, because and they want that for two reasons. One, maybe you'll say something totally incompatible with the job, like, I get really angry at work, or I tend to fall asleep on the job or something, that they'll just cross you off the list. But the other reason they ask it is they want to hire people who are self-reflective, who are mature enough to be able to learn and grow from experiences that didn't work out so well. So the best answer to all these questions, greatest weakness, give me an example of a time you failed, criticism you received from your boss, the best answers are ones where you pick something you learned about yourself a long time ago, show how you learned from that experience, like this thing that didn't work out a long time ago, right? This criticism you bought from your boss from 15 years ago, whatever. Show how you learned from it and how it's helped you ever since. And then maybe even end with a success story to illustrate how it's helped you and how you've been so successful. I had a client, we were just going over this like a couple of days ago, where for her we came up with, she was saying, early in my career, my boss came to me and said, you're good at your job, but you're spending way too much time on these projects. You're trying to dot every I and cross every T. You're not getting into all these other things that are really important. And she realized that. My client said, she realized that it was like a wake-up call to her. Her perfectionism was causing her to be really bad at prioritizing. So she said, I had to come up with an entirely new way of thinking about my workload. I started thinking about the 80-20 rule. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up 80-20 rule. It's a great way to prioritize. The 80-20 rule became my, guiding star. And I really focused on, not having to get everything done, but getting the most important things done and then moving on to the next project. And that made all the difference. And it's why I've been so successful in my career over the past 15 years. If you want, I can give you an example. And then she gave an example. That's the idea. That's how you do it. Okay? Let's see. What else we have here? Some of these questions, like remember another rule here. I already told you about one golden rule of interviewing. You want to keep the focus on how you can help them using your success stories, right, to illustrate it, or using your questions to learn how you can help them. The other golden rule is negativity is a no-no. You want to keep things as positive as possible. So if they say, like, have you dealt with a difficult boss or a difficult colleague or something, or even a difficult employee, do you have to buy into that negativity? Maybe you could say, well, I never thought of anybody as difficult. I've been lucky, but I've had challenging bosses, but I love a challenge. In fact, let me give you an example. And then you tell one of your success stories. All those stories that you prepared involve challenges. So just make that your answer to your difficult boss and change the answer to a challenging boss. Similarly, like, do you prefer a manager who's hands-on or hands-off? Do you have to pick one? If you pick hands-off, well, then you don't like hands-on. If you pick hands-on, you don't like hands-off. It's negative, right? Even if you do have a preference, don't say it. Just say, I can work with either. I have no preference. What kind of manager are you? You get the idea, right? So, all right, let's keep going. We have a lot more to cover. So that's some idea about how to handle difficult interview questions. Now, there's another situation, difficult interview situations. This is like, sometimes I had a client who, before we were working together, he came up to me and said, Rob, I had an interview. I thought it went great. And I didn't get an offer. It's just an example of, I don't know what's wrong. I'm just not getting offers. I get these interviews and I don't get offers. So I said, tell me about the interview. And he said, oh, we had a great conversation. It turned out we both came from the same small town. And, we just had a really good conversation. And then he started telling me about the job. I said, did you learn anything about how you can help them? Did you tell him how you can help? No, we never got to that. It just never came up. That's why he didn't get the offer. Because you have to find a way to A, learn how you can help them, and B, show them how you can help them in this interview. Some people are bad interviewers and they just never get to it, or things go in weird directions. You can let them go in these directions a little bit. Maybe you can it's like rapport building. Maybe you build a relationship that way, right? Maybe that's 5 minutes of your interview, but not the full amount. At some point, you have to wait for a pause and say, oh, you know what you said, I was just curious about something I saw in the job posting, or what you said 5 minutes ago really reminds me of something I did at work that I think you might be interested in. You want to hear about it. Look for an opportunity to share your stories, to learn more about how you can help them. Very important you do that. Okay. Now, in the chat feature, I want you to answer this question. What do you do? I'm just curious what you all do when the interviewer asks you about salary. Anybody? Tell me what you think. Use the chat feature. I want to hear what you think. How do you handle this question? Okay, I like some of these responses. Now, my favorite answer is deflect and buy time. That is my favorite answer. I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay. Now, a couple of you are getting close. Ask them what they have budgeted for this position. Ask for their range. That's not the first thing you say. That's if you're getting squeezed. If they ask you again, then you might ask that, right? The first thing you try to do is say something else. Okay. I wouldn't directly answer the question because right now this is a screening question. They are using this to screen you out. They have all the leverage. Once you get the offer, all the leverage switches immediately to you. They want you to start yesterday. They're not thinking about any other candidates. They want you. And then you can negotiate all these things that weren't negotiable before you got the offer. But right now, while you're still interviewing, you can't negotiate now. They're going to just offer the job to somebody else. So the best thing to do is to try to stall, is to try to not have a salary conversation until after you get the offer. You should try. Okay? So the way I would approach this, I'm going to give you a script, and you should really just follow the script. The way I would approach this is first, just say, look, salary's not going to be an issue. If they say, so what are you looking for? They might ask you this question. What are you looking for? Compensation's not going to be an issue. I know we're both reasonable. We're both fair. We'll be able to work something out. That's the first thing you say. Okay. That's going to work half the time. So they might say, fine. Okay, fine. And that's it. You're done. But it won't work the other half the time. So when that doesn't work, maybe if it's somebody from human resources and this is one of the things they need to ask, and they say look, I know you say that, but we really need a number. Then you say one of two things. Pick one of these two things. And actually, I think I like the second one a little better. You could say, look, what I'm looking for is the market rate for this role. I'm still doing my research, my due diligence on what that market rate is, and I'm still learning about the job. I'm curious, what have you budgeted for this role? What are you thinking about? Since you've, I'm sure, done that research already. Let them give you a range, and then you'll just say, unless it's way off, if it's low or even below the lowest number, as long as it's not too far below what you would, the bottom line low number you'd want, don't start negotiating with them. Don't say anything. Just say we'll be able to work something out. Say we'll be able to work something out, and save the negotiation for later. Okay? And then the last thing, if they say, look, I know you say we'll be able to work something out, but we really need something, then you say, I'm looking for, and give a really broad range, 100 to 200,000, or 80 to 140,000, or 200 to 300,000. It's depending on what I learn about the job and what the results of my research on is. I think it's these salaries are all over the place. I'm still learning from my research. Give them a broad range. So they feel you answered the question, and it's the lowest you could possibly accept to the highest you think they would ever pay you. Okay, that's the kind of range we're talking about. Now, by the way, if they ask you, what are you currently making? You should handle that question just the same way as if they say, what are you looking for? Because what are you currently making is not an appropriate question. First of all, it's illegal in a lot of places. It's illegal in New York City. I don't know if it is in New Jersey. Maybe Jenna, maybe you know, or somebody else knows. But it's illegal in Massachusetts. It's illegal in some places in California. It's illegal in lots of different places because it's not right. It shouldn't be based on what you are currently making or what you made in your last job. It should be based on what the market rate is. That's what's fair and what's reasonable and what's appropriate. That's why the question became illegal in a lot of places. So if they ask you that, just answer it like you would any other illegal question. Answer the underlying question, like salary is not going to be an issue. Say that, right? You know, and if they keep pushing, ultimately they want you to say, look, I need you to give me your salary for your current job or we can't move forward. Then you got to make a decision. Do I want to work for someone who just doesn't get it? Do I want to work for a company that doesn't understand best practices in interviewing? Well, if you really want to, then answer it, you know, or you might answer it and then say, take it as like a sign that maybe this isn't the right company for you. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. At the interview, you want to get there early now. If it's virtual, like everything still is, or almost everything still is, that's not an issue, right? But don't sign on late to the Zoom call, you know? Take notes, and notes are really important because you need to remember how to follow up. You got to remember what they cared about, what they, you know, was important to them, what they needed, what their answers were to your questions. Like you got to remember this stuff so you can influence them after the interview or even during the interview, you know, later. So now I don't want you to be scribbling furiously and not making eye contact. You still have to make eye contact. You got to look them in the eye. What does that mean in a Zoom call or a virtual call? It means making sure that the little window of the picture of them is, or if it's a big picture, great. If it's a little window, make sure it's close to the camera. Okay. Again, in-person firm handshake, just dress professionally in our virtual world means a step down from completely formal, right? Now, in person, this guy here in the picture is perfect, right? But for our virtual world, it's overkill. We either lose the tie or lose the jacket for guys, right? And for women, do something equivalent, right? So either do a nice dress shirt and a tie or a nice dress shirt and a jacket, but not all three, because we all know we're all home, right? That, you know, anything below your waist, who knows what you're wearing, right? Like jeans or whatever, you know. So they know that. So you don't go overboard. It looks like you're trying too hard. That's all I want to say. Okay. If it's for video, you want to make sure that, like, if you wear glasses, that there's not too much glare in the glasses. Like, test this stuff out, you know, things like that. Just to make sure you look good. The lighting is good. Okay. Again, negativity is a no-no. We talked about that. These things are pretty obvious, right? If it's in person, make sure you're not announced too early because they'll be annoyed about that. Don't do a fish handshake. Don't be a know-it-all. We talked a little bit about this before. What that means is that you don't want to come across like you really should do this. Or I looked at your website and your website's missing this, this, and this. This is what really needs, like day one, we really just need to do this. Like they might be like, whoa, hey, you know, that won't work for us. Or you're coming across as someone who's a little too arrogant. Like a better way to do it is like, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? Or this worked for us. What do you think it might work for you? And they might say no, but they still will like the way you thought about this or you were being thoughtful. Or they might say, yeah, it's a great idea. You know, that's how you present your ideas. Okay, that's what I mean by don't be an interview know-it-all. Okay, now we're going into the last part of those 4 parts to this interview webinar, right? We talked about strategy, preparation, what do you do at the interview? Now we're getting into the follow-up. And the follow-up starts in the interview. Towards the end of the interview, you must ask these 2 questions, right? Just so I'm clear about what you're looking for, I'm curious as to how I compare with the other candidates. The second question is, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? You know, because the sale begins after the customer tells you what their objections are. You got to know if they have any issues. I don't want you to walk out of that interview or, you know, hang up from the Zoom call thinking, wow, that went really well. I really hit it out of the park, and then you never hear from them again, or they turn you down. I want you to find out before it's too late so you can still influence the outcome. You can make an impact somehow. And so these two questions are really important, and you want to ask them, and they will answer them truthfully unless you're way off, like they really just didn't click with you personally or something like that. Then they'll feel uncomfortable, but you'll never have gotten the answer anyway. You'll never have gotten the offer anyway. So it doesn't matter. So ask these two questions, okay? Because this is the key to following up and turning a no into a yes, okay? So I'm guessing a lot of you write thank you notes after an interview. You might write letters, thank you emails, right? I don't want you to write thank you emails anymore, okay? I want you to write influence emails. I want you to do whatever it takes to get another meeting and to ultimately close the deal, okay? So it's not about thanking them unless they did something for you, okay? In fact, an influence email, it's not a generic email. It's not like I can just write this ahead of time and I can use it for all my interviews. No, it's based on the things you found out that that particular person you are meeting with or that you met with needs help with. So if you're meeting with, say you're in marketing and you are meeting your marketing director, you meet with the chief marketing officer, like your boss. Well, they're going to want to know certain, like, can you do the job? Then they also had you meet with HR. HR is a different agenda. Maybe they're looking for problems in your resume because they don't know the job like the chief marketing officer does. Maybe you're meeting with information technology. They want to know, are you going to be a good partner to them? Are you going to be demanding things that they can't fulfill in terms of technology, finance? Are you going to go over budget? Like, so basically you want to address the things that they said they care about or that you think they care about in your follow-up email. That's how you want to think about this. It's very personal, okay? So address the areas you forgot to bring up, that you didn't do justice to. Maybe address objections they raised, not by saying you objected to this. Don't remind them they objected, but just talk about the issue they raised, the objection, in a positive way. Show them that you heard them. Use words like you mentioned, you said, like use the word you in these follow-up emails to make it sound like, so they know that you really are responding to what they said. Not just me, 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 me. It's me in the sense that you're responding to them, what they said, okay? And one more thing, by the way, before I forget, I almost forgot this. Just there's one time where you cannot ask the question, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? If you have a panel interview where you're interviewed by 2 or 3 people at the same time, for example, they won't know. They won't be able to answer this question. They will need to talk first. They'll only answer the first question individually, but the second question, they as a group would need to talk before they can say about how they feel about moving your candidacy forward. So for panel interviews or interviews with multiple people, just ask the first one. For individual one-on-one, ask both. Okay? Anyway, you want to write an influence email, okay? And you want to listen in the interview for things that can help you write that influence email. In fact, the whole interview, you should be thinking about things that you can learn in the interview that will help you to write that great follow-up. The needs, their challenges, issues, objections, the competition, what's going on, what's your competition, through that follow-up, that interview question you ask at the end that we just talked about. Let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'm going to take your questions, okay? So this, for example, you can read it on your own. You're going to get the slides, right? I already sent you the link. But I just want to give you the background here. In fact, before you read this, let me just give you the background because I don't want you to start reading it yet. I want you to listen for a second. So Julie, she was interviewing to be the director of business development for this company. And she had a great set of meetings in a first round of interviews. Then she met with the executive director, the number 2 person in the company, had a great conversation. And she thought everything was going great. It seemed like everybody loved her. She loved them. Then she asked the executive director, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? One of those 2 questions. He said, frankly, we're not going to move you forward in the process. She said, what? She was totally surprised. What do you mean? Well, you're a great relationship builder and all that, but We need someone who can dive into the numbers, who can really analyze the data, analyze the numbers, so they can steer the sales team properly. And I don't see that you have that in your background. So she was totally surprised with it. She had no idea they needed that, and she didn't even know what to say. So all she could say was, I'll address that. She was just totally surprised. So after the interview, we wrote, she wrote and I helped her with it, this great follow-up email, this great influence email. And you'll notice this is the email. In this email, there's nothing about, there's like a thank you, but it's not so much about thank you. She said, like, look, I left with a clear picture of what you're looking for, right? She talked about her analytic ability. She didn't say you objected to the fact that I didn't have my analysis experience. She said I bring superior analytic ability. Then she said, I know from my own experience that you only succeed for what you measure, and I didn't bring my analysis success out in my resume. So I'd like to demonstrate my ability. If you're amenable, I propose that I analyze some of the department's spreadsheets containing sales data, and I'll present my findings to you. I'm happy to sign any confidentiality agreement or feel free to alter the numbers if necessary. So that's what she said. This is no thank you note, right? This is really an influence email. Send me some, she's saying, send me some data, I'll analyze it. I'll prove to you I'm good at this. She sent this email. She didn't hear anything for a week. She figured out, didn't work. I tried, And then all of a sudden she got an email a week later, okay, here. And the executive director had attached a spreadsheet with sales data. So she analyzed the heck out of that data. She had a 3-day weekend. She spent that whole 3-day weekend analyzing this information, writing up her recommendations based on the analysis. And then she emailed it to the executive director and said, here are my recommendations. Here are my analytic results. And I'll get on a meeting. I'll get on your calendar to discuss these results with you. Now, this is really important. She didn't just say, here are my results, looking forward to your thoughts, hoping we can have another conversation. She said, I'm going to get on your calendar to discuss this. She just did all this work. If you're ever asked to do work or you ever do work, be proactive. Make sure they owe that to you. You want to get on their calendar. You want to discuss this. Don't wait for a response. And she did exactly that. She got on the guy's calendar. She had another great conversation, really wonderful. They didn't even talk much about the sales data. Then she said, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? The same question she asked previously. He said, I feel great about it. You're one of our top candidates. Then she asked the second question. And so that was a big improvement, right? From frankly, we're not going to move you forward to you're one of our top candidates. Then she asked the second question. How do I measure up against the other candidates? How do I compare? He said, listen, you're a very strong candidate, but look, this other guy, it's really between you and this one other guy. And this other guy's done exactly this job before, so we're leaning towards him. So what did she do? She wrote another influence email. And in this email, she talked about, she couldn't say that she had done this job before because she hadn't. She hadn't done the same job before. She hadn't exactly that experience. But she could talk about her unique competitive advantage that only she brings to the table, that nobody else has, including this other guy. And that's what she did. This whole email is about her unique competitive advantage, right? So that was what this was about, right? It's a talent that I've honed throughout my professional career, and she just talks about that, and she got the job. She got the offer. So you can read these in detail when you get the slides. So I just wanted to tell you, this is super powerful. I included a couple more examples here for you. This example you can read on your own. It's more conventional. This person used subheadings. It's a great technique when you're writing business emails, short paragraphs, even bullets. They're great. This one, I just want to talk about this because I just want to show you this last example, how powerful it is to write these follow-up emails. This client got rejected. This is the rejection email. Pat or I will be back in touch in the event we end up expanding the scope of our search with a wider net. Basically, they're saying, we're not interested, right? We were looking for people who've done this exact job. You haven't. So did my client say, okay, thanks, hope to hear from you if something changes? No. They said, I appreciate your candor. Sounds like you're identifying some highly qualified candidates. I'd like to know, however, my blend of experience that uniquely differentiates me from the competition. And then my client listed bullets of these key differentiators that the competition doesn't have. They ended up bringing my client back in, and ultimately my client got a job offer because of this follow-up influence email after they rejected him. Anyway, so make sure the follow-up is a big part of your interview process, and you focus a lot on it. Okay, so again, to get the slides, here's the link, bit.ly/WP52521. My couple books I have out on Amazon and on my website, my email. And let's take questions. So, any questions?
Thanks so much, Rob. I am, if anyone has any new questions, feel free to type them in. I saw some questions earlier in the evening, and I'm just going to scroll up. Okay, so a question came in about asking, how does the process differ for the field of education?
I can tell you from experience, the process does not differ at all for the field of education. It is exactly the same. In fact, education, you could be a teacher, an educator, or you can be an administrator, right? Either one of those, it's exactly the same process. I'm working with an educator, with a teacher right now, going through all this stuff. It's all working. I mean, just trust me in this. I've, worked with over 1,000 clients. It's exactly the same.
Great. Okay. Let's see.
And the reason it's exactly the same, I just want to say one more thing on it, is because if you think about it, this makes sense. It's like you're telling them, you're giving them examples of how you can help, maybe tell them what you would do on the job. It makes sense. You're keeping the focus on how you can help them. Like everybody wants the same thing. They want to know how you can help me. Every dean or every principal or every senior administrator in a school, it has the same thing. They want to know how you can help them. So it's the same strategy. It's a sales strategy. It's a consultative sales strategy. That's why it's the same, because it really does make sense. I'm sorry, Jenna, you were about to say something?
That's good. Thank you. So a few more questions came in. So what's the best way to handle digital interviews where you have no idea what the question is? This is the first step before the interview, before the first interview.
Oh, you mean you're saying even before, when it's not with a person? Is that what they mean?
I think so.
I guess
for the individual who asked that, if you want to clarify, feel free to do so.
Well, I'll tell you, it's the same. It's exactly the same. It's the same thing. They're going to ask you questions, and you're going to, in certain cases, you're going to have to memorize, like for your pitch, for those questions where they're designed to get you to say something negative about yourself, like your weaknesses or criticism your boss gave you or time you failed. You memorize those, right? For the rest of them, for the salary, you got your answer there. For the rest of them, bring in your stories. Always try to bring back, it's the same exact thing. There's no difference.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is a two-part question. So first, do you have recommendations for an internal candidate who is interviewing for promotion? And how does some of your advice differ when you know the interviewers, competition, and challenges?
It doesn't differ at all. It is exactly the same. The only difference is, from what you're telling me, is that you have a lot of information about what they need. So what does that mean? You're going to craft better stories. You're going to be better prepared to show them how you can help them. You'll better be able to focus your answers on what they need, and so you have a big leg up because you know all this stuff ahead of time. That's how I would answer it. Your question.
We have lots of questions coming in here, so we'll try and get to as many as we can. The next question asks, if I have an interview that goes well, but I don't get an offer, and I later apply an interview with that company again, should I bring up my prior interview if it went well?
Oh, I think I can't answer that for sure. I think it depends. I don't know. I don't know that you need to do that. I think I'd say most of the time you don't need to bring it up. They'll know in the system. They'll ask you about it maybe or something, right? you don't need to bring it up, okay? But if it's like something like it's in the same department or something, where like they all know each other, maybe then it would be a little weird if you don't bring it up. So then I would say, yeah, bring it up. So in other words, there's not a one size fits all answer to this question.
Okay. Next question. If you never got an interview but got a standard rejection email, would it be a good idea to send an email to ask them why you did not get an interview as well?
No. Here's what you should do. It wouldn't be a good idea because the standard rejection is they don't even remember, or a computer did it. I love the idea that you're thinking about learning about why when you get rejected. So I want you to apply that to situations where you had an interview or interviews and you didn't get the offer. Try to reach out to someone who you felt like you got along with them, but they didn't make you the offer, and say, listen, in fact, don't even email them, call them. Try to say, listen, if you felt like you had a good rapport and that you got along, say, listen, be gracious. Say, look, I know you made an offer to somebody else. You're not moving forward. I wish you a lot of success. I hope the new hire does well and that you reach your goals with the new hire. But I'm still in the interview process. It would really help me to give me some insights as to what was issues that came up. It might help me with other interviews. Would you be able to help me with that? They'll answer because you were very gracious. You were very nice just now. You wish them well with whoever they decide to hire, and they'll answer. You'll get that feedback, and then you might even ask for a referral after that. So I like the attitude there. But in this specific situation where you didn't even have an interview, it's a waste. What you should do instead is I would never just apply. This is going outside of this webinar, really, but it's about getting interviews, which we talked about in a prior webinar. I would never just apply. If you know there's an opening, you can apply if you're a close match, but then figure out the person you would likely work for. Try to use LinkedIn or the website or Google searches or whatever. Try to give your best guess as to who you would work for, and then send them a very assertive, even hard-hitting email about how you can help them. Don't even mention the job posting. Don't even mention the posting. Just talk about how you can help them. I think we covered this in a prior webinar. I'm pretty sure we did. In fact, I know we did. So you should look at one of the prior webinars where I talked about getting interviews. I have examples in there of this. Okay, that's what you should do. Don't just count on the application to get you through. That's the front door. Everybody's going that way. You want to go in the side door. Don't email HR, unless you want to work for HR. Email the person you think you might work for, maybe their boss, your boss or your boss's boss, and make your case without even mentioning the posting. That's what you want to do. Okay, next question.
Okay, so we have a couple questions on a similar topic. So the general question is, how long should you wait to follow up after an interview to get an update on their decision? Or what if you interviewed weeks ago and you haven't heard?
Yeah, great question. I wouldn't wait more. I'd say 2 weeks. If they say they're making a decision in a week, follow up at the end of the week. What you want to do, by the way, this brings up something I wanted to mention, that it's better for you to interview later in the process than earlier. Because if you interview later in the process, you're going to stand out more because your interview is closer to their decision-making time. Also, they will have a better understanding of what they're looking for because they've met other candidates, and their ideas about what they want may have evolved based on those meetings. So the interview, the questions, it's all going to be better. So if you get an interview, if they ask you for like dates, pick the latest date, or even say, can you come? If they say, can you come in this week? Can you say, would it be possible to do this interview next week because I have so much going on this week? And if they say no, then do it this week, or pick the end of the week. Try to push it off. Now, the reason I'm saying this is in the answer to your question. If you know they're making a decision, you interviewed late in the process, they're making a decision this week, check with them at the end of the week. If they're early in the process, give them a couple of weeks and then check in with them. Say you probably have interviewed some more people. Maybe maybe your thinking has evolved about the role. Would you like to schedule another 20 minutes to talk so I can address any new thoughts you might have, right? Or something similar to that, or even just checking in. I remain very interested. There's another way you could do this too. You could say, checking in. I'm very enthused about the role. I wanted to make sure you knew that because I am having other conversations elsewhere, and I wanted to make sure we don't inadvertently miss an opportunity to work together through lack of communication. I think your company's great. I'd love to work for you. So make sure they know you're not going to be around forever, and that's why you're keeping in touch. So to make sure that you don't miss an opportunity to work together.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. I've had phone interviews and later get asked the same questions by the same person in person. Should my answers be different?
No. No. Make them the same. The repetition is good because it's going to be different people, right? If you're a phone or if it's the same person, and they ask you, they won't ask you the same question. They'll ask you a different question or a variation of the question. So you have 3 success stories. Maybe you don't use the same story, or maybe you use the same story but tell it from a different angle. That's how you have a little bit of variety. But the answer, if they say, "What's your greatest strength?" and you answered it one way in the initial phone interview, and then they ask somebody else asks you, "What's your greatest strength?" You can answer it the same way. The repetition will help your answers to be more memorable. It's a good thing.
All right, so we have 2 minutes left, so we'll try for 2 more questions. The first is, do you have any tips on making your application stand out in an oversaturated field? And when is it appropriate to follow up on an application?
Applications stand out. Make your cover letter. Well, first of all, you have to have a good resume. We don't look at the prior webinars, for that, right? Your cover letter, you might use a format that, if you are a close match, will really help you to stand out, which is your requirements versus my qualifications. It's not a conventional letter. It's a letter where you say something like, below, you write something nice. I'm delighted to offer my credentials for this job, and I think I'd be a great fit, and blah, blah, blah. Just like a little bit. Just write a couple of sentences. Below, I've excerpted your requirements followed by my qualifications. Pull out a few of the key requirements. Now, if there are 20 requirements, you're not going to do all 20. It'll be a 10-page letter. But pull out maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6, and just pull them out as quotes and then respond to them so they see how you fit, how you match so closely with the posting. That's a great way to do it. I'm sorry, what was the other part of that question?
I think you
Answered
covered. The second part was, when is it appropriate to follow up on an application?
I don't know who you're going to follow up with. I mean, again, I think it's not about following up. It's about it's not about never follow up on an application. Let's put it that way. Don't follow up. Instead, find the person who you are most likely to work for, not HR, unless you are wanting to work for HR, and reach out to them directly and try to make your case that way. Okay? That's how I would do it. And do that right away. Do that maybe even before you do the application.
Okay, great. And last question, I think we've covered all the questions in the chat box. If I've missed yours, I apologize. But the last question I see here is, I have to complete an online aptitude test, which seems to be becoming more popular before I can even speak to anyone. Do you have any suggestions on preparing for that?
There are websites that help you prepare for them. My advice is not to spend too much time on it. I wouldn't worry about it. If you can't make it past the aptitude test, maybe you wouldn't enjoy the job. Maybe you are the wrong fit. I really wouldn't worry about it. It's hard to game those tests, but you could do an online search if you want some more. Like there are like firms that try to specialize in that, So that's what I would say. Don't have a lot to add on that. Other than I wouldn't worry so much about it.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, Rob, so much for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to you all, our alumni, for joining us this evening. Don't forget to join us for our final session in the series that will focus on effective salary and job negotiation on June 22nd. So I hope you all enjoyed the program. Thanks for staying connected to William Patterson, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks everyone.
All.
Thanks, Jen. Bye-bye.